Hey kitchen besties, welcome back to my channel. If you have been researching the Cuisinart Custom 14 food processor, you're in the right place. Here's everything you need to know about it before purchasing. I have had this food processor for just under a year now. I purchased it last Black Friday when it was on sale for $1.99 instead of $2.49. And in those 10 months, I have processed a lot of different foods. A lot of things that I wouldn't normally process either, both to see if I was missing out and to make sure that I adequately tested it before I shared my full review with you all. And now that I feel like I have done enough testing and processed far too many things almost, I'm happy to say that I'm pretty impressed. It's powerful, it's quiet, and there are a few quirks, but nothing to the point where I would not recommend this. And since I know that I'm keeping this food processor and I don't have to send it away for repairs anytime soon, I finally get to throw this box away to make room for literally anything else under my stairs. Like I said, I have done quite a bit of testing with this machine. As a food blogger, I am constantly in my kitchen working on new recipes, and it gives me even more of an excuse to try processing various foods. While doing so over the past 10 months, I've noticed pros and cons, and I'm going to share all of them with you today to make it easy to know if this food processor is suitable for your needs. I'll also include ways to upgrade, which will include optional accessories available for purchase. I'll be honest with you, I have not personally felt like I needed any of them. I think a wider slicing disc would be nice, and the dough blade works fine, but I could have gotten away with just what came in the box. However, I recognize that I may not process the same foods you plan to process, and I would love to make your life easier by letting you know that an accessory exists just in case it fulfills one of your needs. If you'd like to support me, I'll have affiliate links in the description for everything that I've mentioned in this video, but as always, no pressure. I am making this video for you, which is why I'm starting with the cons. I really appreciate that you have chosen this video over or in addition to others, and I want to do my best to respect your time. I never want to sell you a product and then tell you all the reasons it wouldn't work in your kitchen afterwards. That's just not how I do things around here, and I hope you can appreciate that. And while I have been very impressed with the Cuisinart Custom 14 food processor and plan to keep it for many years to come, here are the cons. Number one, it is not immediately user-friendly. There are a lot of safety mechanisms with this food processor, and while they're helpful, don't get me wrong, they're not mentioned anywhere in the manual, so if you're not lucky enough to assemble it correctly on your first try, you're gonna think you got a faulty product, which is what happened to me and tons of other people who have left one-star reviews saying not that it didn't work for their needs or not that it wasn't powerful enough, but that they simply could not get the machine to turn on. If you watched my unboxing and first use video, you know that I had difficulties trying to get this to turn on.
Am I dumb?
And this went on for way longer than I care to admit.
Oh, I'm dumb.
The only full assembly image of this food processor that you get is on the front of the booklet. It has this little run through of every single piece, but again, you're not looking at it to figure out, okay, this is exactly how everything should be oriented. You're just looking to make sure that all of these items ended up being in the box. As soon as you turn past that page, it moves on directly into pureeing and chopping food, which is not helpful if your machine doesn't turn on in the first place. And I noticed this especially with the shredding discs because there is absolutely nothing in the manual on how to attach the stem to the actual disc itself. And when you have this food processor assembled, it works really well, but that doesn't matter if you can't get it to turn on. I almost had to resort to a third-party video in order to figure out how to attach the detachable stem to the disc. And while there is a time and a place for third-party videos, like the one that you're watching, I don't think you should have to watch one in order to figure out how to work a machine. That is the manual's job. And if the manual did not do the job, then it needs to be rewritten. So if your new Cuisinart food processor does not turn on, make sure that you have these 3 safety mechanisms engaged and then try again. So number one, the bowl has to be locked in. Every single, okay, and this is another thing, because you have to have certain things unlocked in order to remove the bowl from the base, which again, nowhere in the manual. So let me do a little bit of undoing. Okay. So if I try turning this on right now, it's not gonna work. I can try on, I can try the pulse, and it's not gonna do anything because nothing is locked in. If I have the bowl locked in, the lid locked in, which has the pusher opposite the handle, not on the same side, and this pusher locked in, Now I have all three locked in, and it'll turn on. But if I don't have this pusher in far enough, if it's just resting on the top and doesn't actually press this down, it will not turn on. If I have the presser in, but I have the pusher on the other side, which, I mean, it kind of closes, it's not going to turn on. And if I have the lid locked in, I can't unlock the bowl from the base. So in order to remove it, you have to unlock the lid and then unlock the bowl. It just takes a little getting used to, and so it's not a huge problem. It's not going to be a problem for you because you know what to expect now. You're welcome for being a cuter version of the manual, I guess. Not necessarily a deal breaker overall if you know how to manage it, but the manual is absolutely no help. And also, this photo, absolute lie. Number 2, smaller batches can struggle. And I say this with a caveat because this is on the larger end of the food processor spectrum. I purchased this one specifically for the increased capacity and increased horsepower, and I'm assuming that if you're looking at this one, you probably are too, because Cuisinart sells a number of smaller models. However, just keep in mind that the increased capacity can make it difficult to effectively mix smaller batches of less than 1 cup or 250 milliliters. One of the first things that my husband and I tried to make in this food processor right out of the box was toom, which is a Lebanese sauce kind of like mayo, but it's made just from garlic and oil. So you mince garlic and then slowly pour in oil to allow it to emulsify into a really thick mayo-like consistency. And it actually minced the garlic really effectively, but it put it all the way on the side, so I had to stop and scrape down the bowl, which was fine. But when I tried to stream in the oil, there's just enough of a space between the bottom of the bowl and the blade that it wasn't mixing. The oil ended up pooling in the bottom, and it's very important that you add only a little bit at a time. So by the time there was enough oil for the blades to hit, it was a mess and it didn't work. So we had to switch to an immersion blender. Sorry, water break. If I don't include this in the video, it means I did not drink any water, and that is bad for me. So we're gonna do better. I also tried to make peanut butter with just 3/4 of a cup of peanuts. It was all I had left in the pantry, and I wanted to do at least one test of peanut butter before I filmed this. It did work pretty well, but I had to keep scraping down the sides. There just wasn't enough food in the food processor to have it pull back down to the blades automatically, so I had to do that manually. So if you plan to use this mainly for batches of food over 1 cup in size, I think you'll be fine. The occasional small batch just requires a little bit more babysitting. If you make a lot of smaller batches, just recognize that this is a limitation for this machine, and a smaller capacity model may be a better fit for you. Number 3, dead zones. Realistically, the areas where food does not get mixed in this food processor are pretty small, but I have noticed 2 places. The first is right on the bottom of this machine where the blade rests. For more liquid batters, it's also the outer bottom edges of the bowl. I noticed this most with thicker liquid mixes like cheesecake batter. And there will usually be a little ring on the outside that I'll have to scrape down. And then once I add the eggs, I have to do another scrape in order to make sure everything gets incorporated. And this is inconvenient because the blades are really close to the edges of the bowl, but not close enough to not require scraping. And because the blades are so close, it makes it really easy to nick the spatula. And I've done that quite a few times, so I now have a dedicated food processor spatula, or a DFPS, if you will. And yes, I could remove the blade, but this normally has a lot of food on it, and there's more food in the bottom of this bowl where the blade was resting. So if I remove this, I have to hold this in one hand, and then I go around the bowl with my spatula in my other hand, but there's more food in this center portion that then gets into this area, and we're back to not having everything incorporated. So what I tend to do is I keep the blade in here and I use my DFPS around the side of the bowl in a counterclockwise motion. That prevents it for the most part from getting nicked because it's hitting the dull side of the blade, and I can still scrape down a good 75 to 80% of the sides of the bowl here. And you'll notice this with dry ingredients too. There'll be just a little bit here that didn't quite mix. I don't think it's more than a gram or 2, so you're not really gonna be affected by it, but just know that if you think your bowl is clean, there's definitely gonna be more food stuck on the bottom here. Number 4, the bowl has gotten filmy. I am kicking myself for not taking more close-up footage of this bowl right out of the box, but I didn't even think about it because I didn't have to do anything like that when I did my Breville toaster oven review. I know it for next time. I am sorry in advance. You're gonna have to take my word for it. This is standard for food processor bowls though, especially if you're processing abrasive materials like sugar or graham crackers or Cheez-Its, anything hard that is going to scratch the inside of the bowl. The manual does tell you this, and it recommends having a separate bowl. Chopping certain foods may scratch or cloud the work bowl. Among them are ice, whole spices, and oils like wintergreen. At this point, with less than a year of light to medium use, I don't think I'm going to need to purchase another bowl for at least another 2 years. It's still very much visible to the naked eye. It's just when you're filming with a camera that I think the scratches are more obvious, especially if you tend to process harder foods like crackers, spices, sugar, ice, that sort of thing. Way to upgrade, Cuisinart sells bowl and lid sets for $40 to $65. So if something happens to your bowl, you accidentally drop it and it gets chipped, or the patina is becoming so filmy that you decide, I would rather have something that I can see through better, it's really not going to set you too far back to buy a new bowl, and it is way cheaper than purchasing a brand new food processor. Number 5, it's not great in the dishwasher. Now the manual says that all parts except for the motor base are dishwasher safe, and we recommend washing them in the dishwasher. However, I think they're recommending that from a safety standpoint and not necessarily a long-term wear standpoint. I get that they don't want you to wash these blades with a washcloth or a sponge where something can slip and you can seriously hurt yourself because they are sharp. But I've noticed 2 problems with almost exclusive dishwashering that I don't think would happen if I exclusively hand washed. The first is that there are food particles that are trapped in this spring. And I'm really sad about it because this was one of the things that I purchased the Custom 14 for. I like that the handle is sealed. There's no option for food or mold or anything to get stuck or grow in there. And there's no way to get enough water pressure in there to push it out. The saving grace here is that it has absolutely no contact with the inside of the bowl, and it's one of those safety mechanisms. If I figure out a way to get rid of them, or if you have any suggestions, please let me know. And then secondly, this pusher detail has gotten discolored over time. When I took it out of the box, it was super reflective and I could see myself in it. But now it's got a little bit of a patina from the abrasive dishwasher detergent. That's normally why stainless steel is not recommended to go in the dishwasher, so I'm not quite certain why they recommend putting this part in. That said, those are all of my cons. The first one is really my biggest complaint, but it shouldn't be a problem for you because you know how to assemble this machine. Everything else I think is pretty standard for food processors in general. There's nothing that I've seen over the last 10 months that has made me want to return this specific food processor and get a different one. Once I got it to work, of course. So if you can live with those cons, here are all the pros for the Cuisinart Custom 14. Wow, I have drunk so much of this already. Go me. Number 1, it is so quiet and powerful. I could hardly believe it when I turned this on for the first time. Oh, you can't even hear that. I have never had a kitchen appliance run so quietly before. Not my stand mixer, not my immersion blender, not even my toaster oven. It's one thing for a motor to work well and be loud like my KitchenAid. It is an entirely different level of engineering when you have a motor that is this quiet and this powerful. Part of that is because it has a 720 watt motor, which my husband likes to say is clearly over-engineered. The only extra noise I have ever heard when running this is not the motor struggling, but the dreams of crackers being crushed as they get pulverized very quickly. Number 2, easy to use, once you get past assembly, of course. But really, there are only 2 buttons here. On and off, or pulse. I'll be the first to admit that I'm a micromanager in the kitchen, so I'm usually looking at whatever I'm chopping or shredding or dicing in the food processor anyway. I personally don't need an added timer or any fancy buttons that a lot of the other food processors I looked at have. I'm looking at you, Breville sous chef. For me, that was a feature I didn't really need, and I would much rather have 2 very manual buttons that I can tell when I'm pressing. Like, I can use the pad of my thumb I can use any of my fingers. I can do it not looking at it. I'll shut my eyes just in case you don't believe me. But it makes it really easy to use with just 2 buttons. And while figuring out the assembly was a little tricky, I did really appreciate all of the pages that are dedicated to processing certain foods. The manual goes over techniques for chopping and pureeing for fruit and cooked vegetables, hard foods, nuts, beating egg whites, processing ingredients to make pastry. And while I would love for you to check out my website for a bunch of recipes, I recognize the ease in having some of these just available to you. Number 3, absolutely pulverizes everything. If you're not careful, this will puree everything you put in it, so there is a little bit of finessing trying to figure out how long certain foods need to be in here. It's really convenient to use the food processor to make a graham cracker or Biscoff crust, and then just wipe it out and use the same bowl to make your cheesecake batter. It cuts down on the dishes, which you know I am all about here. It even minces single cloves of garlic really well. Anything that gets minced flies up to the sides of the bowl, and the whole pieces remain by the blade until enough revolutions mince it properly. So you don't really have to worry about garlic getting turned into puree, just a lot of other foods. If I know I'm using the food processor bowl for other things in the meal, I absolutely use this first to mince my garlic. It does dice onion, but it's not pretty. Each piece is pretty irregular. There will be some longer shreds, there will be some really small pieces, until they all get uniformly pureed. So you have to be careful when you're dicing onions, just a few pulses and you're usually good to go. I think I still personally would prefer to chop by hand, just so that I can get perfect little squares. It's my micromanaged kitchen again. But if you really dislike dicing onions, this would absolutely be a great time saver for you. Okay, herbs are actually really great in the food processor. If you wash them and let them dry and then process them, they will stay good for up to 10 days in the fridge. So that works great for meal prepping. You can put a whole bunch of cilantro in here and then add it to a salsa in the beginning of the week, but keep some of that processed cilantro to add into burrito bowls like 3 days later. And then you don't have to deal with prepping cilantro later in the week because it's already in the fridge and it's gonna stay good for a long time. And then hard foods like graham crackers, tortilla chips, regular crackers, those usually get pulverized pretty quickly into crumbs, but there's almost always 2 or 3 larger pieces that stay behind for whatever reason. They'll just kind of keep bouncing up on the blades and not really cut. So I'll usually remove the lid and place those larger pieces directly in front of a blade, and then the next time I turn it on, they're gone. It really does work well for about 99% of what you put in this bowl. It's just usually that last 1% that it struggles to get right without any manual intervention. Number 4, it shreds beautifully. It is lightning fast, cheese poses no problem, potatoes pose no problem, and there is very little waste. And one of you asked me how well this food processor works to shred cheese and then freeze for long-term storage. If you shred block cheese yourself, it tends to crumble or clump together in the freezer, and in a lot of cases it just ends up being more convenient to just buy pre-shredded cheese even though it costs more. So I shredded some cheese, put it in a silicone bag, and froze it, and I was really impressed. These shreds worked really well out of the freezer, both frozen and thawed. I didn't have any crumbling and I had very little sticking together, which I was really impressed by. So impressed that I would actually be comfortable using that thawed shredded cheese in a food photography shoot, which is where you want the cheese to look really pretty. So if all I have to do to save money on cheese is spend like a minute at my cutting board making sure that it's cut into sizes that'll fit into this feeder tube, and then another minute actually shredding it, for me that's totally worth it. The Custom 14 also worked really well to shred potatoes, so if you're into making your own hash browns, or I don't know what else you make with shredded potatoes, but if there are other things that you can make with them, this would work really well for that. Ways to upgrade your shredding: if the medium shredder disc is a little bit too big for you, Cuisinart also sells a fine grater and a fine shredding disc. So you have 2 more options that are even finer than this one if you want smaller shreds. Number 5, slicing is a dream. Tomatoes sliced beautifully. I was skeptical because it's hard to get perfectly sliced tomatoes unless you use a serrated knife, and there's just enough serration on this blade to get perfectly even tomato cuts every single time. Harder vegetables like carrots and celery required a little bit of getting used to. You don't want to put one in at a time. Instead, you want to fill out the feeder tube so that they all process at once. Otherwise, it's a little bit dicey. The slicing disc also worked really well to slice onions, but it was a little lackluster on strawberries, and that's because the strawberry seeds were getting stuck in the serrations on the blade, which again is why I say that this photo is an absolute lie, because there's no way that they got these cuts so straight across when I had such difficulty with the strawberry seeds getting stuck in the blade. It did slice the strawberries well, but it wasn't picture perfect like this. Way to upgrade, Cuisinart sells different sizes of their slicing discs. The one that comes included is a 4mm. They also sell a 2mm, a 6mm, and an 8mm, along with a French fry disc. So if you prefer thicker or thinner slices, you have quite a few options available to you. Number 6, you can make pie crust super fast. I want to preface this by saying I am a big handmade pie crust kind of gal. I love the really big flakes that you can only get by hand making a pie crust. I have not found a way to emulate the same flakes using a machine. So if that is also your favorite kind of pie crust, I would not recommend using the food processor to try to get the same result. Tart crust, however, brilliant in this food processor. Super consistent, really quick, and just all around perfect for making really short, crisp pastry. I used my same pie crust recipe available on my website to make it. I just processed my butter and flour together in the food processor until it looked like breadcrumbs, and then slowly streamed in water until it formed a dough ball. It was a little softer and stickier to roll out than handmade pie crust, but the texture absolutely made up for that. It was crisp and light and buttery and basically everything that I imagine a store-bought pie crust wishes that it could be. So if you prefer short pie crust in comparison to really flaky pie crust, this food processor is probably going to be your favorite way to make them. Number 7, making dough is lightning fast. I did not think that the food processor was going to work nearly as well as it did with dough, and I have never been so happy to be wrong. I've been conditioned to think that my KitchenAid is the end-all be-all for mixing dough, and that's just not true. My KitchenAid Artisan stand mixer has a 325 watt motor, and compared to the 720 watt motor in the Cuisinart, there's no contest. The Custom 14 mixed up my pizza dough in 2 minutes, compared to the 10 to 15 that it normally takes in my stand mixer. And while I did use a half batch of my pizza dough because I didn't want to overload the food processor, if I do the same amount in my KitchenAid, it still takes 10 to 15 minutes in order to knead it all together. I do still think that the mixer is better for larger batches, maybe over 3 cups of flour, but for anything under 3 cups of flour, the food processor is going to be my new go-to. And the lid of the food processor actually stays pretty clean if you put the yeast and water in the bowl first and then top it with flour. The flour on top prevents that water from splashing out, and I normally just give the lid a quick wipe as opposed to actually having to run it through the dishwasher after. So in terms of dough cleanup, I actually think the food processor works better because I only have the bottom that goes in the dishwasher. Way to upgrade, Cuisinart sells a dedicated dough blade that has shorter plastic blades designed for use with breads and pie crust. I originally was not going to get it because I have heard really awful reviews, but the more I thought about it, I would rather spend $20 once to prevent you all from spending who knows how many more $20. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. I really like it. I could see how it might not work for a smaller batch of dough, but I think any pie crust with more than about 1 cup of flour would work just fine. I tested it with my pizza dough, which has 250 grams of flour, and that worked really great. It was basically no different than my metal blade, except I knew that it was not dulling my metal blade because it's just plastic. So if you plan to make a lot of dough in your food processor, I would recommend getting the dough blade just to prevent dulling your metal blade prematurely. You want to save that sharpness for things that actually need it, and dough is not one of those things. Finally, number 8, the small footprint. So overall, compared to others on the market, this food processor does not have that big of a footprint. The footprint itself isn't bad when it's on my countertop, but I can't fit it in my cabinets with the bowl and the feeder tube attached. So I store the bowl separately from the base when I want to put it back in my cabinets. I'm able to roll my shredding discs to the very back of the cabinet and then put these in front, so I'm not worried if I have a friend come over with a little one, but if that is a concern for you, I would recommend getting a disc holder. Way to upgrade: if you plan to keep this food processor on your countertop, I would recommend investing in a disc holder. That's going to hold all of your shredding discs in a plastic case so you don't have to worry about food splatters, dust, or kids getting into them, just in case you want to keep them out and don't have room to store them in your pantry or kitchen cabinets. And I actually like that the disc holder is an optional purchase, because the Breville Sous Chef, which I also considered, comes with a ton of separate accessories, which on the one hand is really nice if you plan to use them. But again, I have found this simple 2-button, 2-disc, 2-blade combo to be good for pretty much every single need that I have had. And the Breville Sous Chef has a ton of separate accessories that I would have to find storage for. And even with a larger kitchen, I recognize the premium storage that is kitchen cabinet space. So for an appliance to allow me optional upgrades that overall will then cost about the same as the base price for a model with a ton of accessories that I may not use, I'm gonna pick the base model every single time. And that's just me, but that is what I found over the last year of using this little setup, as opposed to all of the bells and whistles that comes with the Breville Sous Chef. All right, we are almost through. There were a couple more things that didn't quite fit in the pros or the cons, so I'm just including them here in a miscellaneous section. The food processor does take up considerable space in the top rack of your dishwasher, but again, that's pretty standard for all food processors anywhere. Next, the base of the machine does move around a little bit when you use it. It doesn't move around enough for me to be worried that it's going to bounce its way off of the countertop, but if you are planning to use it to film recipe videos, just know that you may have to adjust your camera or the food processor a couple of times to get those perfect shots. Also, the feet do not leave marks on my countertop, which I appreciate so much. And then lastly, sharpening or replacing the blades. What happens in a couple of years if you realize your blade is dull? Can you sharpen it? And I don't think that's possible without seriously specialized equipment that is going to be way more expensive than a $20 replacement blade. So, way to upgrade. Cuisinart sells replacement blades for about $20 on their website. I think that's pretty reasonable, and I haven't noticed any dulling over the past year, and I've done quite a bit of processing. I think the timeline on your blade dulling is really going to depend on what you use it for. I would imagine that harder foods are probably going to dull your blade a lot faster than pureeing a lot of soft foods will. Either way, it's really easy to replace, and I'm sure it's going to feel like a brand new food processor if your blade was really getting dull. I made it all the way through! I did my best to be as comprehensive as possible for this review, but if you have any more questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I am more than happy to be a resource for you if you need a little bit more clarity or a little more information on an aspect. I'll show you how to clean the entire Cuisinart Custom 14 at the very end of the video, but I just wanted to wish you well in your hunt for the food processor of your dreams. If you think it might be the Cuisinart Custom 14, I would so appreciate you purchasing it from the affiliate links in the description. It goes a long way to support my little channel, just like giving this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful, and considering subscribing if you would like to see more like it. My name is Alyssa. I am the recipe developer, food photographer, and blogger behind the Floral Apron, where I share new recipes every single week. You can find them on my website at floralapron.com, along with cleanup ratings for each one and a short video that I post here on YouTube to make sure that you know exactly what to do. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate it more than you know, and I'll see you next time. You've heard me say it 1,000 times by now. I put the bowl and accessories in the dishwasher, so I'm just going to show you how to clean the base of this food processor today. It stays pretty clean during use, but every so often I use a lightly damp rag with the faintest bit of dish soap to wipe down the entire top. I pay special attention to any crevices, like this little button where the bowl locks in at the back, and the seam in the center, because that will sometimes get hit with food if you've removed the blade to scrape down the sides of the bowl. Once those look good, I wipe down the stainless steel accents and then run my cloth over the tops and bottoms of the buttons. Once I'm satisfied, I use a dry portion of the rag to dry off the stainless steel. Now you can stop there if you want. I will sometimes wipe down the feet of the food processor too, just to make sure crumbs haven't gotten embedded. I flipped it over entirely so you could see better, but it's very heavy and much easier if you just tilt it to one side and clean them that way. And that's it, good as new. I hope this video was helpful for you. Thanks again so much for watching. Please let me know any questions you have in the comments. I'm always happy to help.